Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Sheri Silberstein. I'm the Executive Director of Equal Justice USA. And on behalf of our entire team, I want to welcome you to The Right to Repair, a discussion about healing and restorative justice. If you don't know EJUSA, we are a national organization that's working to transform the justice system. Our work includes violence prevention, healing, racial equity, ending police violence, and ending the death penalty in cities and states across the country. We believe that it's not enough to fight against the justice system that is broken. We also must build what we want instead. And so for that reason, our primary work is to imagine new responses to violence that don't inflict more harm, but instead create safety and healing for everyone. And that's what we'll be talking about tonight. The launch point for our conversation is an incredible documentary called The Prison Within. The people in the film talk about the deep trauma in their lives, the origins of their pain, and the profound impact of the healing process that they experienced. This message aligns so closely to the work that we're doing here at EJUSA to center healing as a path to transforming justice. And so we're thrilled to host this conversation. Before I turn it over to the panel, I just want to take a quick minute to explain the healing process that's depicted in the film, which is called restorative justice. Our current system is based on the concept of punitive justice. Who did something wrong and how do we punish them? Restorative justice flips that script and focuses instead on who was harmed and what do they need to heal and rebuild their lives. There are a number of different ways to carry out restorative justice, but a common theme is to bring together everyone who's involved, the survivor, the person who did the harm, and their communities, and everybody works together to make things right and move forward. So rather than trying to hold someone accountable against their will, which is what our current justice system claims to do, restorative justice is a collaborative process of accountability that creates the space to acknowledge the harm, take responsibility, repair, and make sure that it doesn't happen again. And that is true accountability and healing. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Christine Henderson. Christine runs EJUSA's Trauma and Healing Network, which is a national network of people who've survived trauma, violence, and mass incarceration. She's been involved for many years in EJUSA's work to engage communities in healing, in fighting the death penalty, and more. So thank you again for coming. And Christine, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sheri. I'm so excited to introduce our panelists for today. But before we start, we want to start with a couple of housekeeping rules. Want to make sure that everyone is aware that this webinar is being recorded. We want to make sure that those that cannot join us will have access to view this at a later time. Please feel free to use the chat. We want you guys to be engaged. If you want to have conversations, if you want to leave a comment, don't hesitate to use the chat. But if you have a question specifically for any of our panelists today, please use the Q&A button that you should see right here at the bottom of your screen. So let's move on. We're excited to start having some dialogue, and we're going to go ahead and start with introducing our panelists. We are fortunate to have an amazing panel with us today. I'll start with Katherin Harvey. She's the director of the award-winning film, The Prison Within. She's also a former public defender who has brought her commitment to justice into art as she makes her film. Thanks for being with us today, Katherin. It's hard to know where to begin with Troy Williams because he does so many things. He's most recently the founder of Restorative Media, a company that allows him to combine his storytelling and media skills together. He's also a Soros Justice Fellow. He spent 25 years incarcerated at a number of facilities, including San Quentin State Prison, where he helped to develop the restorative practice program and started the award-winning San Quentin Prison that is documented in the film. Finally, I need to recognize that one of our original panel members, Ray Winan, a violence prevention activist from Detroit, was called away today on an emergency. So we are sending prayers and our thoughts to him and his group that are dealing with a loss. But we are incredibly grateful for Dr. Dorothy Johnson-Speight for being able to join us today at such little notice. Miss Dorothy's son, Khalik, was murdered in 2001 in a dispute over a parking spot. When she couldn't find the support she needed in her city of Philadelphia, Dorothy started Mothers in Charge to give to survivors what they actually needed. Today, there are 7 chapters across the nation, and Dr. Dorothy has been doing more work in the area of restorative justice as a way to keep parents, as a way to help parents heal and young people to be accountable for the harm that they have caused. I'm also so proud to brag a little bit that Ms. Dorothy is also a vital member of our EJUSA Trauma and Healing Network and a longtime friend of the organization. So to everyone here on the panel, welcome and thank you. We want to start today's discussion with the film that moved us to hold this panel today, The Prison Within. This is the first film documentation of a groundbreaking restorative justice program at San Quentin State Prison in California. Let me tell you guys, if you have not seen this movie yet, I encourage you, take the time to watch the film. It's so important. You can find it on many platforms, including Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, and other on-demand services that will be available to you. I think at the beginning of the program here, Sheri gave us a good understanding about what restorative justice is. Katherin, as the director of the film, can you start by telling us a little bit about the film, how you got involved, and if you could also help us introduce the first clip that we'll kind of be seeing to help us start our discussion.
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so a lot of this film was informed, as you mentioned, by my work as a public defender. And then I was also a volunteer prison college instructor inside a men's prison, really working primarily really with men who were sentenced to die in prison, who were considered irredeemable. And, not surprisingly, I, of course, saw the exact opposite. So those relationships in that time really informed the film for me. And then simultaneously, I was also working kind of inside and outside the walls with survivors in different restorative justice contexts. So when I came to make the film, I knew that I wanted to make a film that really broke down the barriers of us and them, of Black and white thinking, of people in prison versus people who are not in prison. So the film, it dives really very deeply into the complexity and the hearts and minds of people who have committed and survived violent crime, serious violence. And in this process, we begin to see that there's another way. And this first clip that we have here is of Troy Williams, the amazing Troy Williams, who is here with us today. And I really love this clip because in really the course of a minute, Troy, from his own experience, is really breaking down what is wrong and alluding to what we need.
Because of my first run-in with law enforcement at the age of 7, by the time I was 13 and I was getting chased by some gang members, instead of me running to the police station, I tried to make it to the other side of the park where I knew that this particular gang's rival gang hung out at, because I was more afraid of the police than I was of the gangs in my neighborhood. I did not recognize the onslaught that was happening against my spirit. I had locked myself in a prison before I ever went to prison. I built these walls up to shield me from this psychological trauma that was coming at me from every direction. And
Thank you. Troy, I actually wanted to ask you a question. There was something that what you had just said was really moving. And when I was watching the film, it touched me. The statement that you made, I had locked myself in prison before I ever went to prison. Through this journey of healing that you were able to kind of walk through this, when you were in the program, can you tell me like what that meant, what this actually means to you, and how you feel that you were able to recognize that?
well, like, it's kind of weird how like oftentimes jokes become like, they reflect reality. So a lot of us, we used to sit around in the yard and we'd be kind of sitting around joking. And, you know, so I remember somebody was saying, yeah, man, I was throwing rocks at the penitentiary long before I got here. And so we just started to like break that down. And when I really just started to take a look at that, I took a look at how I slowly began to wall myself off from other people. I built this shield around my emotions and around who I was in order to protect myself. But this fortress that I built to protect myself actually turned out to disconnect me in a way that allowed me to see other people so different from myself that allowed me to harm other people. So I think that's the biggest thing that comes to mind, is how we often think that we're shielding ourselves by, you know, locking ourselves in or closing ourselves down from other people. But what we're doing is actually disconnecting ourselves from the rest of humanity. And I think that puts us in this psychological space that allows you to physically act out in a way that you probably otherwise wouldn't.
That's actually I think that's actually a good segue into, you know, what we wanted to talk about, because the second clip takes us inside the actual prison, into the restorative circle that is the heart of the healing journey of a lot of the men that were in the program, you as well, Troy. This session really resonated with us as an organization. The man that will be speaking shortly, Sam, he explored his own trauma. And I think what was very interesting is he was able to make the connection of the historical trauma as well as the intergenerational trauma that and how it had affected him. But it took him some time to realize that, right? He was able to kind of walk through that and figure out that journey while he was actually in the program. So Katherin, do you want to tell us a little bit about this clip that we're about to show about this process?
Yeah, so to me also, I just want to say real quick that this clip is very emblematic of so many clips in the film, which is The Prison Within. The title, The Prison Within, which was really with me from the beginning. It's the bedrock of the film, that if we want to change our outside world, we have to change our inside world first, and really take accountability and go deep into all those ugly, dark parts of ourselves that we don't want to go to. And Sam Johnson here and other men in the film do it so beautifully. And so here what we see is Sam, and he's reading a letter of forgiveness to his father, who has since passed, forgiving his father basically for the abuse committed against him as a child. And he's connecting it to his own intergenerational and historical trauma.
I was the protector, the man of the house. I was responsible for my baby brother and responsible for defending him, even if he was in the wrong. I was responsible for keeping my mother safe, even if it meant hurting my dad. Years of what was considered to be I now know to be physical abuse. Seeing my mother's blood as she held the blade of my dad's knife in her hand, stopping him from cutting her throat. This was the day I gave my dad 6 to 8 stitches in his head. I have become a threat to his manhood. I was the nigger he was called by whites. As I grew older, I learned and understood that my dad loved us, but was carrying a lot of pain. The pain of not being accepted as equal. At that time, all we had was each other. And it was better to be beaten by my father than at the hands of the people who hated us and wanted us dead because of the color of our skin. The pain and hurt my dad must have carried to show himself to be a man. He could not afford to cry openly. No, he had to wear the mask of toughness, where a man is not supposed to cry.
Wow. This was a real moving part of the film, and I think there are many different layers to this. As you watch the film, you can actually, see the men acknowledge and find that pain. How was the process for you, Katherin, kind of seeing this kind of develop over time, seeing how the men have grown through the journey of kind of acknowledging what that pain came from, and realizing that they might not be a problem, but that they had to find and solve the problem?
Oh, I mean, it's an honor to witness because, this was part of me making the film actually in the first place. Was I really found kind of more accountability sometimes behind the walls than I would normally find in normal life outside here in normal society with people who are supposed to be quote unquote law-abiding good citizens, and yet over and over and over again going into prisons, meeting people, these men who would just bowl me over with their integrity and their depth. And so witnessing it, first of all, I knew that was what I was going to witness, because I myself had gone through the Vogue facilitator training. So I had already kind of been in those circles before. So I knew it wasn't going to be forced. I knew it was going to be really real and raw and vulnerable. And and I learned. I learned from them. I learned so much from them about really my own healing journey.
I would imagine so. Just watching it, I was actually really moved. And it's very hard to get through it without getting emotional. And you can really see the connection. And I think it also helps you to connect to them as well and identify them as who they are and the pain that they're trying to overcome. So I could imagine that was going to be, that was a very pivotal part of your work, to be able to highlight that as well as you're recognizing it. Miss Dorothy, I wanted to ask you a question. I'm Dr. Dorothy, I'm sorry, I want to correct myself. In recent years, you've begun to do this similar kind of healing work depicted in part of the film. What some folks have not been able to see, if you have not been able to see the film, there is also a piece where those who have been victimized are also brought into the circle, so that they can have dialogue with the men who are going through this journey as well. And they sit in the circle as survivors. I know that you, with the work that you have done, you have been bringing young people who have committed harm together with parents who have lost their own children. Can you tell us, why did you start doing this type of restorative work, Dr. Dorothy, and what kind of changes you've been able to see in the parents that you've been working with? I think you're still on mute, Dr. Dorothy. Yeah, you're still on mute. There we go.
Okay. So this work has been very important to us. As you know, Mothers in Charge is a group of mothers, grandmothers, aunts, and sisters, most of whom have lost a son, daughter, loved one to violence. So initially, when we talked about doing this type of restorative justice with mothers and grandmothers and women who had lost sons, daughters, or loved ones to violence, connecting them to men who had committed harm, a group of men from an organization in Philadelphia called Life After Life. And they were actually juvenile lifers that came home as a result of the Montgomery decision. We had connected them with the mothers, and some of the mothers were not so much wanting to participate because they had lost loved ones to violence. But we knew that previously we had done a lot of work ourselves in terms of our healing, some of the mothers in the organization. And we knew that what we thought and what we had been told for so long wasn't really working in terms of our healing. So we would, be told, of course, that, once you go through the judicial system and that person is sentenced, to life or whatever, you're going to be all better. It's going, you know, your healing process will take place. Well, that didn't happen. That didn't happen for so many of us. So I think we were given kind of a false sense of security in thinking that that was going to happen, and then realizing that we need to do something different. So that's how a few of the mothers had came up with the idea of, let's see how, if we could bring young men, and some of them not so young, together with women, mothers who had lost children. We called it comprehensive community healing, a way that healing happens on both sides through restorative justice piece. And we came together, we were facilitated by a wonderful Dr. Jean Wright, who facilitated conversation and dialogue for 2 days between mothers and the men. And what we found that there was healing that began to happen in that circle, like something we had never experienced before. Some of the mothers who were reluctant in the beginning said, well, I'm gonna come to this, I don't necessarily wanna do this, but I'm gonna come with my authentic self, was one of the mothers. I remember Miss Garcia, you know, at the end of the 2 days was one to say thank you. That after having dialogue with the men and hearing them and hearing who they really were, not animals or monsters, but folks who had made a bad choice or a bad decision at 15, 16, and 17 years old, now 30, 40, 50 years old. They healed, the men were able to do some of the trauma healing that they had been wanting to do for so many years, having a chance to talk to, you know, not the ones they had harmed, but someone who had been in that situation. And the mothers felt so good having to have a dialogue, not with the person who may have killed their son or daughter, but someone who had found themselves in that situation, and that find out that they were just a young man who had made a bad choice and was remorseful, you know, and had transformed his life. And that helped them in so many ways to begin to heal in a way that we did not find through the punitive type of thing that so many of our brothers and young men are subjected to.
You know, thank you, Dr. Dorothy. This reminds me of when we're looking at the film, there's also a Miss Dion who's in the film who has lost her husband. And, you know, and we see that a lot in the work around the advocacy that we do around the death penalty. It's a hard conversation to have. You know, she talked about that feeling of anger, and, you know, and she admitted, like, every time the camera was in my face, I was seeking the death penalty for what was taken from me, which was her husband, who was a police officer. Every time the camera came in my face, I wanted the justice. After he received it, she realized, I'm still hurting. I'm still harmed, you know, and realized that, well, maybe this wasn't what I needed this wasn't the process, or this didn't give me what I thought I was going to receive. And so I want to ask you, Troy, when you started or were participating in this program, and you had to also sit across from you know, mothers or folks that were victimized, you know, like Dr. Dorothy, how was it for you at that piece or that portion of that discussion?
Ooh, I'm gonna try to say this without getting emotional about it. What Dr. Dorothy described was a big awakening for me. On the other end of that, what we call them in San Quentin, we call them surrogate victim panels. And what happened with me, I sat across from a woman, and, you know, people used to always ask me, like, what happened? What do you think the victims went through? Like, what do you think they went through? And, you know, I would think about fear. You know, I would try to put myself in their shoes, but like I said, I'm like, hell, I've been afraid all my life. So I've been living with fear all my life. So that I really couldn't, like, that wasn't enough to, like, really give me that deep level of empathy. But I sat across from this woman, and when she described her, because my crime was a takeover robbery, and she was the victim of a similar type situation. And the way she described her life, and I actually talk about this piece in the film, but, like, I saw what it did to her life in a way that helped me understand how fear paralyzed my life, except for her. She sort of shrunk in and didn't want to deal with people. I buffaloed out and got really aggressive, right? That was my coping mechanism, was that I'm gonna get you before you get me. And so it really gave me a deeper level of insight into how fear had actually paralyzed my own life in a way that allowed me to harm other people so quickly and to justify that harm against other people.
It's so important, like the value to being able to stop and just reflect, actually being able to take the time to have empathy on what someone else is dealing or going through. And I'm sorry that you had to feel that type of pain, but I'm glad that it was a milestone.
Oh, this is all healing. Like, you know, I'm not afraid of I'm not afraid of my tears. Like these tears are healing. This is long overdue. Like Sam talked about, you know, for so long, especially as men, especially as Black men, we taught not to talk about our emotions, or share our feelings, or share what we went through. And the fact that we don't do it, like that's what I was kind of mentioning earlier. When we try to hide our emotions or hide our true vulnerability, that turns us into something else that we're not intended to be. So I'm not afraid of my tears. Like I'm not afraid of my emotions in this day and time, you know? I just don't want to get ugly on camera right now. But I love it. I love it. It's beautiful to me. I love the state of mind I'm in.
Thank you for that. Katherin, being the fact that you actually were a public defender, you know, when we talk about restorative justice, this is not an easy thing to kind of walk through. There are a lot of folks that see restorative justice as you just letting the people that do wrong get away. You just, you know, kind of slapping them on the wrist. You know, coming from that public defender seat where you were able to kind of see how the system worked and see where, you know, the cracks were. Do you think that the restorative justice model or the conversation can be really embraced? Some see it as radical. How do you feel about that?
Oof, that's a big question. So, I mean, yes, 100%, absolutely. I mean, you know, unfortunately, there's not that many statistics and studies, but, you know, we do know that it works. Like time after time, study shows that if you're doing restorative processes, you know, at the earlier stages, you know, before arrest or after arrest, before we get to where Sam and everyone in prison, way before that, you know, the community is more satisfied, the person that committed the harm is more satisfied, and definitely the victim or the survivor of that crime feels much more satisfaction. So, and I mean, it's stunning. It's not like the punitive system is not working. So like, even if there were facets of it that were working, you know, this would still be more valuable. Absolutely. You know, and it's not only that it's not working, it's that, you know, for people to kind of say, oh, restorative justice isn't working because it's letting people off. That's actually not true. That's actually not true. The criminal justice system is letting people off. Because from the beginning, from the very, very, very beginning, there is no accountability whatsoever. When I met with my clients, right away, I was telling them, okay, this is the case, we're gonna plead not guilty, this is what we're gonna do, you know, and the system takes over, the state takes over, because somehow we think that the state knows better what to do with two people's conflict or a community's conflict. So to me, I think that there's far more accountability in this process.
You know, Dr. Dorothy, I'm kind of listening to what Katherin is saying, and as a survivor, can you tell us how the justice system didn't actually help you? And, you know, what revelation did you have after you went through that process and saw the person that actually killed your son being sent to prison?
As I oftentimes tell the way I thought it was going to be. I thought that as soon as, and parents oftentimes or family members often can't wait until that justice system, that date comes. We got to go to court. And I'm thinking, because I've been told that as soon as this happens, you'll be all better. And I think it was kind of, talked about a little bit earlier. You think that once you go through the court proceedings, that you're going to be all better. And I remember particularly coming out of the courtroom that sunny day, it was actually my son's birthday. It was June 26th was the day that the murder trial ended. And I remember saying to me, you've got justice and it's all going to be good now, but it wasn't. I remember coming out of the courtroom feeling even worse than I did before I went in, before, the sentencing, before all of that. Now, I'm not to say, as Katherin just mentioned, hold people accountable, but it wasn't what I was told it was going to be for me. So I knew I had to do something else or lose my mind, or just spiral totally out of control because of what I was feeling as a result of the death of my son. So I started seeking counseling, and it was kind of a real avenue for me. But I knew that there were other things that needed to be done. I just wish that we were taught restorative justice practices very early on in life. I think would make a difference. Troy talked about the fear. If you understand restorative justice, it's like a freedom. It kind of frees you up to be open to other possibilities, that you're not because you don't understand it. It's not letting people just get away. It's finding a way to heal, to begin to heal when parties can come together, those that have harmed and those who've committed harm, and find a way for both parties to begin to heal and grow, in a way that the punitive system of the criminal justice system, it just doesn't do that.
So often people are looking for justice in the system, and unfortunately they have to go through the process before they realize that it's very seldom that you actually do find that. And it's also very seldom that you also healing through that process as well.
One of the things I do want to say, Christine, is that people, for this type of restorative justice, where there's been a homicide, a murder, people have to be at a certain place in their healing. So I talked about, first it was the counseling, it was helping me to work through my anger and all of that I was feeling, because I don't think I would have been receptive to even at this point, now that the work that we're doing now, I wouldn't have been receptive. So some people don't get it because they don't understand it, number one, and they haven't done the work in their initial healing to be at a place where they would be open to this. So it's important to understand that everybody's not going to be at a place where they are opening their arms and being open to restorative justice. It's a process. Understanding that, number one, is the main thing. You've got to understand what it is and how it can help you, but also you may need to work through some of the feelings and emotions that are associated with this type of harm. We're talking about homicide. So be able to work through the anger, the guilt, all the kind of things that you go through when you've had to bury a son or daughter because someone made a conscious decision to take that person's life.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the additional information. It's important to understand that everyone's healing journey is not the same. We don't all start at the same line of the race, and we don't finish the race at the same time either. Exactly. And so being able to understand that and explore that. And I'm wondering, Troy, with that, was it difficult for you in those times? Let me ask you this, because I don't know, because it did not show this in the film, but were there times when you were having conversations with survivors, those who were also victimized, where they didn't, they weren't ready. Folks were not ready to kind of walk through this program. Can you talk to us about that if you had that experience?
Well, I think that I've had that experience. I won't say necessarily with the surrogate victim panels, because there's a process that you have to go through in order to participate, to make sure that like you're is, you know, you just can't walk and throw people in a room and expect a good conversation to happen. You have to work with people and make sure that people are ready to actually do the work. And so, you know, the people who facilitate the program, both inside and outside, and it's important for me to say that these programs are facilitated by me and inside, who are in equal partnership with people coming from the community. That's critical, because there's not this top-down approach. There's this approach knowing that you know, our humanity is wrapped in each other, and that's just the beauty of it. But so for the most part, the surrogate victim panels are, you know, there's a magic that just happens, right, when these things come together. Even if a person gets to say tough stuff, they get to say some stuff that is tough, right, that is hard to be on the receiving end of, and yet you're able to look that person in their eyes and feel it. And when you're able to feel it, it changes the dynamic of your makeup, right? So there's a magic that happens. Now, I have also been in spaces where people don't get it, and people want to argue, people want to fight, people want to do this other stuff. And, you know, I'm like, every person has to go through their own process. And what I often try to encourage people or try to let people know is that people who have committed like crimes against somebody else were at some point in their life also a victim, right? So my brother was murdered, and every year since his murder, since 1994, I watched my mother go through stuff. Every year. And yet, because she's also had a son that has taken a life and has done some things, somehow what she's been through is almost diminished in our regular court system. Somehow, because I've hurt somebody, that somehow I am not also considered a victim when my brother was also murdered. And so we're left to deal with certain traumas to try to fight and do it on our own. And that's not the way the village is supposed to work.
No, I hear that. Thank you for sharing that. While I have you, I guess, because now you're in a different place, right? You have your own, you said, you know what, I'm going back and I'm giving back to the community in my own way. You're one of the first participants at the San Quentin project to participate in the Restorative Justice program. Did you notice it having any effect in which how you're working now, right? Right now that you're working a little bit with film, you're working with guys who are coming out. Talk to me a little bit about that transition of how the Restorative Justice program and process helped you to kind of do what you're doing now.
Right. And I do want to say this, that I have to pay homage to all the other men who walked this walk before me, because if it wasn't for them dudes on the yard, I probably wouldn't have walked it. If it wasn't for some of my like the older people in the community who actually, like, people don't understand, like they see this image about prison that is shown via media, and they don't really understand what happens 20 years later, 10 years later, or some period later after transformation has happened, how the older men on the yard hold younger people to a different standard. And so if it wasn't for these other people, I probably wouldn't be walking, doing what I'm doing right now. In addition to community, and, you know, I always give a shout out to certain wardens and certain staff who push the line for certain things to happen in a good way. But the restorative practice, like, it informs everything I do now. Like it's my work. Like, it's my work. And by me being able to blend it to having some understanding about my own inner journey and having to figure out a way to be a communicator in one of the, you know, I started my film career inside a prison, and I had to figure out a way to communicate the stories of individuals in a way that would not bring them harm, in a way that would but speak their truth, and in a way that would also have to make it past the searing eyes of an administration or some people within the administration who did not believe we should be given those type of privileges inside the prison walls. So it all has informed me in my ability to like communicate. Like when somebody blurs up or they do something, I'm able to see through their hurt and their pain. And I'm able to, hopefully, I like to think I'm doing a good job of sharing my story in a way that motivates others. And, you know, I work with young people, you know, all over the country. And I love it because to them, I'm an authentic voice. You can't give me the excuse that you give other people about why you do what you do. I lived it, been there, done it to the fullest. So I understand it on a deep level, you know? And so I just try to use that to build this bridge. I could not go back in time and undo the trauma that I did, but I could utilize my history in a way that allows me to hopefully remove some of the roadblocks for other people.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Katherin, I wanted to ask you this. In this journey of making this film, what are some of the assumptions about restorative justice that you think people get wrong? I think you did such a great job of kind of walking us through the process and what restorative justice looks like in the film, but you did such a good job showing it. I want to know what have you learned through this process that people still get wrong, that they just don't understand about the process?
So first, what's interesting is what's been coming up too in this past conversation, like these last couple of questions, is how we compartmentalize, right? Like we're compartmentalizing punitive justice versus restorative justice, as if one will go away and then it'll be replaced with this other system, right? And like in this conversation, of course, we're finding that doesn't happen, right? Like Dr. Dorothy wasn't ready until a certain point. Dion wasn't ready at a certain point. Jamie, I mean, you know, and so it keeps coming up here to kind of be careful of talking about, I don't know, different forms of justice or different systems, because eventually like restorative justice can get just as co-opted as as you know, any other community justice platforms. So to me, it's less so about restorative justice, although, you know, that is a term, it is valid. To me, it's a paradigm shift. It's an utter paradigm shift in the way that we operate as a society. Restorative justice is a facet of this paradigm shift where, I mean, you know, it sounds so corny right now, but you know, we're respecting each other and not taking things into black and white, like you're evil, you're bad, you're good, you're this, you're that, but instead really unpacking everything. So to me, restorative justice is the opposite of the way that our society works right now, where we're like, oh, systemic oppression, racism, poverty, class, you know, like, oh, that's all so painful. Let's just not look at any of it. And let's just keep shoving it under the rug and shoving it under the rug. And like, look at what we've created doing that. Like, we're in the most it breaks my heart where we are right now, how divisive we are and how black and white things are. So to me, that's where I think people get it confused, is thinking that it's one versus the other, when really it's all a continual journey, and it's a continual paradigm shift that I think we have to all kind of keep pushing, not only in our justice systems, but in schools. And I don't just mean schools and like in disciplinary, but, you know, teaching restorative justice and ways to act in the world from a very young age. They're so different from what we're taught now, where it's like, you know, I got to get mine, basically.
Living right now. Troy, I want to kind of wrap up our panel discussion here. I want to thank everyone, Katherin, Dr. Dorothy. But Troy, I want to ask you before we pass the questions to the audience. Sitting back and watching this film that Katherin this amazing film that Katherin was able to put together, and you're watching it, what comes over you? And what do you want people to take away from it? You were a part of this process. You know, you were a part of a discussion. You were part of putting a restorative justice dialogue together at the prisons. Like, how did you feel watching this film? And once again, what do you want people to take away from it?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind, I start smiling to myself, is that when you say, what happens when I watch it? If you look in certain scenes, you actually see me inside doing time. I was serving a life sentence when Katherin came in, and I was just so like, I love film. I love this kind of work. I just, whenever I would see a camera crew come in, it was like my sworn duty to interact with people coming in, attempting to tell our stories, right? And so, and I joined in, you know, not knowing when or if I would ever come home. You know, I joined in because I thought it was a worthy cause, and I felt that Katherin would be somebody that would carry our stories in a way that gave it justice, to use, you know, no pun intended, right? But I think what I really hope for people, and I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but I think what I really hope for people is that people take this stuff back to their communities. And by that, I mean, a lot of times, and you know, I usually ask the crowd for permission to be blatantly honest. And so since I can't really see faces with people, I'm just going to take for granted that I have permission to be blatantly honest. And so what I mean, what I'm about to say is that a lot of times people see work that needs to be done, and they're quick to come into Black and brown communities to do the work, right? And they forget to go home and talk to their racist cousins about how that affects our communities and how that affects their own communities. So this type of work needs to go back to your community, and you need to have a conversation, because look at this country right now, right? Like, you know, I think we're either on the verge of transformation or to hell in a handbasket. But this work needs to go back. Oh, thank you. Somebody says you have permission. Thank you, Don. But this this work needs to go back to your community and back to your family. Like, it has to start with self. If you're not starting with yourself, then you can't help me arrive anywhere if you haven't been to the destination.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Troy. Once again, thank you, Katherin, and thank you, Dr. Dorothy. This has been an amazing conversation. It's very important for us to make sure that we point out what, you know, transformative justice looks like. This film really is aligned with the work and what we believe in with our, within our organization at EJUSA. Thank you to all the people that have joined us tonight. Please, 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 if you have not seen the film, please take the time to watch it. You know, please take the time to look for it. You can find it on Amazon, it'll be on Google Play. Reach out to us if you're having any problems finding it. We can make sure that we can direct you into the direction that you need to go. Please keep in touch. We want to make sure that you all keep in touch with EJUSA. If you're not already a part of our EJUSA family, you can get our emails. We would love for you to follow us on your social media. If you are wanting to donate to Equal Justice USA so that we continue the work that we're doing within the community, you can visit us at EJUSA, at our EJUSA website. We're going to be taking a few questions from the audience, and I am now going into our question box. So remember, if you have any questions specifically for our panelists, please make sure that you put it in the box directly below that says Q&A, so that we can make sure that we are addressing it. Our first question comes from Jewel Anderson. Is there work being done to replicate this kind of program in youth detention homes, as as was done at San Quentin. I'm gonna ask, anyone can answer this, but Dr. Dorothy, I mean, I know that you kind of do a lot of some of this work with youth. I don't know if you had, if you wanted to answer that, as well as Troy.
I think, as I said earlier, I think it's important that we begin to teach others about restorative justice, so there's a clear understanding of the purpose and the goodness in it. So yes, we have started working. In fact, Philadelphia is working now with several organizations to have a restorative justice city. So we're looking at that now with the different organizations that are working together to work especially with juveniles, or I would say youth, and especially youth that are at risk, to begin to help them understand the process, as well as help those who may have been harmed as a result to understand the process and know that it's a healing process that will help our communities, and our communities need healing. So yes, teaching it and getting people to understand the value in it is so very important.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Dorothy. Troy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I work inside of the DOJJ, the California Department of Juvenile Justice, with a program called the Rites of Passage program. And this work is being done on a lot of different levels. Like it's in high schools, like it's especially, I live in Oakland, and you know, Oakland is just like on it in so many different ways. Like, you know, we're in juvenile facilities, we're in adult facilities, we're in high schools, we're in junior high schools. Like I got friends that are working in a lot of different levels with taking this work, and just the practice of having some type of emotional and restorative practice into with our young people on multiple levels.
Our next question comes from Roger Kincaid. Mr. Kincaid wants to ask Troy. Troy, is a part of your journey spiritual in nature?
Completely spiritual. I went through what I went through because I didn't listen the first time. So I'm saying that I can laugh about it now, but yeah, it's very spiritual. And the more that I learn to pay attention to the signs that the Creator would have me walk, then the better I am. And I don't, you know, I'm not necessarily a religious person. I don't prescribe to any particular religion, but I am very spiritual, and I understand that path. And yes, it's very spiritual.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ms. Angela Davis. Ms. Davis asks, is there an envisioning that restorative circle work can be the norm of dealing with trauma from the cradle to the end of life? I understand we are talking specifically about crime and its impact here, but trauma in any form can adapt this nimble and modern process. So is there an envisionment that restorative circle work can be the norm? Katherin, would you like to answer that?
I mean, I think that's the vision. Absolutely, 100%. Are we there yet? Maybe we're kind of like inching there a little bit, because also like even what Dr. Dorothy and Troy were saying about having restorative justice in youth facilities, they're still very rare. They're still super, super, super rare. I mean, there's horrendous prisons and juvenile facilities across this nation where people barely see the light of day. Maybe have an AA circle or something like that. So, yes, that's the vision. Yes, can it be done? Absolutely. Yes, should we all be working towards it? 100%. I believe it's 100% possible. I think anything is possible if we put our hearts into it. But there's work.
Yeah, and we know that there's that these conversations are happening. And so with that, that's also a plus, because we know that we can continue to push and advocate for this, to, you know, kind of push more out and spread out. We have another question from Will Simpson. He's directing the question to Troy. Troy, what is the first conversation like with someone, inside or outside, who has committed harm to begin to start their healing journey? Nope.
I'm like, what is the first question? I'm not quite sure if I'm understanding the
First conversation like with someone, inside or out, who has committed harm to begin to start their healing. What's that first conversation like?
Well, I don't know. It's kind of hard to remake a conversation because there's certain things that like happen in the moment, and you know, a lot of that conversation is going to depend on who the individual I'm talking to, where they're at in they process, you know, what kind of acceptance they're in around they process. I think, you know, I don't know. This is a little difficult for me to answer just like off my head, but I just I would just gauge where that individual is at and what that individual is receptive to. But the fact that, you know, we can have a conversation, I think that speaks more of a volume. I don't know if I know how to answer that question right off the bat right now.
Okay. Well, no, thank you for that, for your response. I want to just once again take this opportunity to thank everyone for coming and joining us today. Katherin, I want to thank you for, you know, for the film, but also just taking the opportunity to spend some time with Equal Justice USA and our family, our friends who are interested in this work to support transformative justice. We're looking for looking at how we can address issues through a different lens. Dr. Dorothy, thank you so much. You know that you are a friend of the organization. You're a great supporter of the work, but also we know that we called you in the last hour and said, Dr. Dorothy, can you come and help us? And as always, you have blessed us with your presence. You were available and you shared your story. So we're so grateful for you and the work that you continue to do. Troy, thank you so much. You shared your journey. I was so moved by you when I watched the film, and I know that everyone who's watching and who's joined us today, when they watch the film, they will also be moved by you. I want to encourage you to continue to do what you're doing out in the community. I want to encourage you to continue to work with Equal Justice USA, because we would love to not only have you part of our trauma network. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put that plug in, but we would definitely love to kind of, you know, make sure that we uplift your work and make sure that we're showing people that people can change, that you don't have to look at someone by the charge that they were charged with, but the person that they are. Thank you all for joining us today. Once again, I want to thank everyone who's with us. We encourage you to watch the film, please, The Prison Within. Katherin, I don't know if you had any final words. I'd love to give you a final word just in case, as the director who was able to come and join us on our platform today. Did you have a word that you'd like to leave with everyone in the audience?
I have an ask. I have a plug, please. If you watch the film, if you love the film, please leave a review for us on Amazon. It actually means so much. This film it's really kind of like the little engine that could. And getting those good reviews really helps it spread, and you know, more people watch it and it impacts more people. So that's what we're really asking people to do right now, to spread the word. So thank you.
Thank you. And remember, everyone, please keep in touch with EJUSA if you're not already. Please, you can get our emails. Please follow us on our social media if you'd like to donate to the cause so that we can continue to do this amazing work. Please, visit us on our website at ejusa.org. Most importantly, continue to fight for change. We can build a better justice system together. It's already happening across the country. We just need to make these brilliant solutions like restorative justice the new normal. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I don't know if they cut us off yet, but who is Angela Davis? I'm like, who? They carry a powerful name. I hope they know that.
I know, it's my friend Angela Davis, actually,
Yeah.
in
Oh, that's
Seattle.
your friend.
In
Oh,
Seattle.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
She's a
Yeah.
powerhouse.
Well, yeah.